Hey everyone, I've been lurking here for a while, never thinking I'd have a story to tell, much less one like this. But here I am, spilling my guts because I honestly don't know what else to do. We've been married for 12 years. I thought we had a strong, solid relationship. We have 2 kids, boys, 10 and 7. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. At least I thought it was. This all started during a family vacation we took last summer. We went down to a beach town we'd never been to before. It was one of those places you see in travel magazines. Endless blue waves, warm sand, and perfect sunsets. It was supposed to be the trip that gave us a break from the grind, some time to reconnect as a family. But instead, it tore my family apart. The first day there, we were setting up on the beach when my wife, Emily, froze mid-sentence. Her eyes locked on something, or rather someone, just a little way down the shoreline. It was a man. He stood out even in a crowd. Tall, muscular, with skin that glistened in the sun. He was a surfer, effortlessly balancing his board on his hip like it was an extension of himself. Emily's gaze lingered a little too long, but I brushed it off. I mean, who wouldn't notice a guy like that? Later that afternoon, while the boys and I were busy building sandcastles, I noticed Emily talking to him by the water. It wasn't unusual. She's always been friendly, the kind of person who strikes up conversations with strangers. But something about the way she was laughing, the way her hand brushed her hair just so, made my stomach knot. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Paranoia would ruin the vacation faster than anything else. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I couldn't ignore. Emily seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone or disappearing to grab something from the room. She wasn't interested in the family activities we'd planned, always coming up with excuses to stay back. When I pressed her, she'd laugh and say she was just enjoying her me time. The surfer, his name was Jordan, by the way, started showing up everywhere. It felt like he was always nearby, just on the edge of our little world. He'd nod at Emily, and she'd blush like a schoolgirl. I even caught her sneaking glances at him when she thought no one was looking. Every time I brought it up, she'd brush me off with, "You're imagining things." Or, "Don't be silly, he's just some guy." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then came the night that changed everything. That night I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't sitting right. Emily had gone for a walk around 8 p.m., saying she wanted to clear her head and take in the ocean air. She promised she wouldn't be gone long. But it was now past midnight, and she still wasn't back. I sat on the balcony of our hotel room, staring at the dark waves rolling onto the shore. The boys were sound asleep, and the entire resort seemed to have quieted down for the night. Everyone but me. My mind was racing. Was I overreacting? Maybe she just lost track of time. Or maybe, then I saw her. She wasn't alone. Down on the beach, the dim light of the moon revealed Emily walking alongside Jordan. They were close, too close. His arm brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. They stopped by a lifeguard stand, their silhouettes casting long shadows on the sand. I couldn't take my eyes off them. My breath caught in my throat as Jordan leaned in closer. Emily hesitated, looking around nervously before nodding. And then, they disappeared behind the lifeguard stand. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I wanted to believe there was some logical explanation, but deep down, I knew there wasn't. Not for this. Not for her sneaking off in the middle of the night to meet another man. I grabbed my phone and debated whether to text her, call her, or storm down there. Instead, I opened the camera app and zoomed in. I couldn't see much, but the way they were hidden from view spoke volumes. My hands shook as I took a few photos, even though I hated myself for it. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. When Emily finally returned to the room around 1:30 a.m., she was startled to find me awake. "Oh," she said, blinking at me like a deer caught in headlights. "You're still up. Where were you?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She hesitated, avoiding eye contact. "I told you I went for a walk. The beach is so peaceful at night." "For 5 hours?" I shot back, my tone sharper this time. Her face flushed. "I lost track of time. I didn't mean to be gone so long. Alone. She hesitated again, just long enough for me to know she was lying. Of course, alone. Why are you interrogating me like this? Because I saw you, Emily, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I saw you with him. Her expression froze. What are you talking about? Jordan, I said through gritted teeth. The surfer. The guy you've been practically glued to this entire trip. Her eyes widened, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. You're being ridiculous. I ran into him on the beach, and we chatted for a bit. That's all. For over an hour? Behind a lifeguard stand. I asked, standing now. My heart was pounding in my chest. Do you think I'm stupid, Emily? Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she were scrambling for an explanation. But none came. Instead, she just shook her head and stormed into the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the closed door, my fists clenched. I didn't need her to say it. The truth was written all over her face. The next morning, Emily acted as if nothing had happened. She was all smiles, laughing with the kids, making plans for the day, and pretending the previous night didn't exist. But I couldn't unsee what I'd witnessed. The sight of her with Jordan was burned into my mind, and her evasiveness only made it worse. At breakfast, I kept my tone casual, but every word was laced with tension. Did you enjoy your late-night walk? I asked, setting down my coffee mug with a little too much force. Her hand paused mid-bite of toast. I told you I lost track of time. Can we please not do this in front of the kids? I let it go for the moment. The boys didn't need to see us unraveling. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the suspicion building inside me. Emily's phone was glued to her hand, and every time it buzzed, she'd glance at the screen and immediately lock it. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. While Emily and the boys were at the hotel pool, I stayed back in the room and waited for the perfect opportunity. When Emily left her phone charging on the bedside table and stepped into the bathroom to get ready, I grabbed it. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. I'd seen her passcode a dozen times before. My stomach churned as I scrolled through her messages. At first, there was nothing unusual. Just conversations with friends, work colleagues, and family. But then I found it. A thread with no name, just a number. The most recent message was a photo of the beach, taken late last night. Underneath it was a single text. Last night was amazing. I can't wait to see you again. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened as I scrolled up, reading their exchanges. They'd been texting since the second day of our vacation. The messages were flirty at first, then more intimate. You're different, Emily had written a few days ago. I don't feel this way with anyone else. Jordan's reply, you deserve to feel alive. You deserve everything you've ever wanted. It was like being punched in the gut over and over again. My hands tightened into fists as I read her words. My wife's words, written to another man. The woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my kids, was pouring her heart out to someone she'd just met. When I heard the bathroom door open, I quickly locked the phone and set it back on the table. My heart pounded in my chest as Emily walked into the room, humming to herself, completely unaware of what I'd just discovered. Everything okay? She asked, smiling at me. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze, the smile fading from her face. What do you mean? I know, Emily, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I saw the messages. I saw everything. Her face drained of color. You went through my phone? She asked, her voice rising with indignation. How dare you invade my privacy? How dare I? I repeated, standing up. How dare you? You've been sneaking around with him, lying to me, to our kids, and you're worried about privacy. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I stared at her, my heart breaking into a million pieces. Then why did it? She didn't answer. She just stood there, silent, as the weight of her betrayal hung heavy in the air between us. The silence between us felt endless, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Emily wouldn't meet my eyes, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tears. "Say something," I finally demanded, my voice cracking. "Explain this. Explain him." She sank onto the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. "I didn't plan for any of this," she murmured. "It just happened." "That's not an answer," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "You don't just accidentally start sneaking around with someone while your husband and kids are a few feet away." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed, but I felt no sympathy. "Not now. Not after what I'd seen. He made me feel noticed," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Noticed," I repeated, my disbelief cutting through the air. "You're telling me I haven't noticed you? After 12 years of marriage? After everything we've been through? It's not the same," she shot back, finally looking up at me. Her eyes were red and raw, but her voice carried a sharpness I hadn't heard before. "You've been distant, distracted, always working or with the kids. And she choked on her words, her voice breaking. "I needed something for me. Just once. Just once," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "Your messages say otherwise, Emily. You deserve to feel alive. You deserve everything you've ever wanted." I threw the words back at her like daggers. She flinched but didn't deny it. "So what now?" I asked, pacing the room. "You expect me to forgive this? Pretend it didn't happen? You think I'm just going to let this slide because you needed something for you?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking again. "I don't know what to do. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You did hurt me, and you hurt our kids, even if they don't know it yet. You threw away everything we built for what? A fling? A vacation fantasy." She opened her mouth to respond, but a knock at the door cut her off. "Daddy." It was our youngest, his small voice muffled through the door. I froze, my anger replaced by a sinking feeling in my chest. "Yeah, buddy? Are we going to the boardwalk today?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. I glanced at Emily, her face pale and tear-streaked. For a moment I considered telling him the truth, that his mom and I weren't going anywhere, that everything was falling apart. But I couldn't. Not yet. "Yeah, we'll go soon," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Just give me a minute." "Okay," he chirped, his footsteps fading as he ran off. Emily and I sat in silence again, the weight of our situation pressing down on both of us. "This isn't over," I finally said, my voice low but firm. "But for now, we're going to put on a happy face for the boys. Do you understand me?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And when this trip is over," I continued, "we're going to have a very different conversation about what happens next." Emily didn't argue. She just sat there, broken and defeated, as I turned away and began gathering my things for the day. The day at the boardwalk felt like a cruel joke. The boys were having the time of their lives, running from game booths to rides with the kind of boundless energy only kids have. Emily and I played our roles like seasoned actors, smiling, laughing, pretending everything was fine. But beneath the surface, the tension was suffocating. Every glance between us carried a storm of unspoken words. I watched her carefully throughout the day. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd subtly check it, her expression impossible to read. My mind raced with questions. Was it him? Was she still lying to me, even now? By the time we got back to the hotel, the boys were exhausted, crashing into their beds without protest. I tucked them in, brushing the hair from their foreheads as they drifted off. For a moment, I envied their innocence. They had no idea the foundation of their world was crumbling. Once they were asleep, I stepped out onto the balcony, needing air, needing space. The ocean stretched out before me, endless and dark, mirroring the storm inside me. I heard the sliding door open behind me and stiffened. "Can we talk?" Emily's voice was soft, hesitant. I didn't turn around. "What's there to talk about?" She came closer, stopping a few feet behind me. "I need you to understand." Understand. I cut her off, spinning to face her. You want me to understand why you betrayed me? Why you risked destroying our family for some guy you met on a beach? Her eyes filled with tears again, but I didn't let up. Was it worth it, Emily? Was he worth throwing everything away? It wasn't like that, she said, her voice cracking. I never meant for it to go this far. I felt invisible, Jake. Like I was just the mom, the wife, the one holding everything together while you. Don't you dare blame this on me, I snapped. Don't you dare try to paint yourself as the victim here. I've worked my ass off to give you and the kids everything. I've been faithful, supportive. But you weren't there, she interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. You were always at work, always focused on something else. I felt alone, Jake. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Part of me wanted to argue, to defend myself. But another part, the part that had ignored the growing distance between us, knew there was some truth to what she was saying. And Jordan? I asked, my voice quieter now. Did he make you feel like you mattered? She looked down, her silence speaking volumes. Did you sleep with him? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide. No, she said quickly, too quickly. It wasn't physical. I swear. I searched her face, looking for any sign of a lie. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But after everything, how could I trust a single word she said? I don't know if I can believe you, I said finally, my voice heavy with exhaustion. Not after this. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the gesture too much for me to handle. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, she said, her voice trembling. I love you, Jake. I love our family. Please don't give up on us. I didn't respond. I just turned back to the ocean, staring at the waves crashing against the shore. Go to bed, Emily, I said after a long silence. We'll figure this out when we get home. She lingered for a moment before quietly retreating into the room. I stayed on the balcony long after she was gone, wrestling with the impossible question. Could I ever forgive her? The ride home was one of the longest drives of my life. The kids chattered in the back seat, recounting every detail of the trip as if it had been the best week of their lives. Emily and I barely spoke, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Every so often, I'd catch her stealing glances at me, her face etched with regret and fear, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her for more than a second. My mind was still replaying everything, the messages, her excuses, the way she looked at Jordan. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Home was supposed to be our safe place, but now it felt like a battleground. As soon as we unloaded the car, the boys ran inside, already arguing over which movie to watch. Emily lingered by the trunk, her hands gripping the suitcase handle. We need to talk, she said softly. Not now, I replied, brushing past her. She didn't push. Instead, she followed me inside, the silence between us louder than any argument. That night, after the kids were asleep, she came into the living room where I was sitting, nursing a beer and staring blankly at the TV. Jake, she began, sitting across from me. I know I've hurt you. I know I've destroyed your trust. But I need you to know that I never wanted to lose you. I still love you. Her words only made my chest tighten. Do you even realize what you've done? I asked, my voice low but filled with anger. You didn't just betray me, Emily. You betrayed us. You risked everything for what? Some guy you barely know. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. I saw those messages. You told him things you haven't said to me in years. Do you know what it felt like to read that? To see you share pieces of yourself with someone else. Someone who isn't me. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what else to say. I was stupid. I was selfish. And I hate myself for what I've done. Good, I said bluntly. You should. She flinched, but I didn't care. I was too consumed by my own pain to soften the blow. What happens now? She asked after a long silence. I don't know, I admitted, my voice heavy. I need time to think. To figure out if I can even look at you the same way again. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I'll give you whatever you need, she said. I'll do anything to make this right. I didn't respond. I just stood up, walked to the stairs, and left her sitting there alone. Over the next few days, I buried myself in work, avoiding Emily as much as possible. At night, I slept in the guest room, unable to share a bed with her. The boys didn't seem to notice the shift. They were too busy settling back into their routine. But I noticed everything. The way Emily avoided her phone, leaving it on the counter instead of carrying it everywhere. The way she tiptoed around me, desperate to say the right thing but too afraid to speak. And then, one night, I saw it. I was in the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water, when I noticed her phone light up on the counter. A message from an unknown number. I miss you. My blood ran cold. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. The message was from him. Jordan. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the thread. There weren't many messages. Just a few brief exchanges since we'd been home. But it was enough. Enough to prove that she hadn't ended it. That she was still holding on to whatever fantasy she'd created with him. I stormed upstairs, phone in hand, and burst into our bedroom. Emily shot up in bed, startled by the door slamming open. What the hell is this? I demanded, holding up her phone. Her eyes widened in panic. Jake, let me explain. No more lies, I shouted. You said you wanted to fix this. You said you'd do anything. And yet here you are, still talking to him. It's not what you think, she said quickly, her voice desperate. Then what is it, Emily? I spat. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you never stopped. It looks like you're still choosing him over me. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she tried to explain, but I couldn't hear her over the roar of my own anger. This is it, I said, my voice cold and final. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Emily sat there, stunned, her face pale and tear-streaked as my words echoed through the room. You don't mean that, she whispered, shaking her head. Jake, please, don't say that. I mean every word, I said, my voice firm. I gave you a chance to end this, to make things right, and you couldn't even do that. She started sobbing, her hands gripping the bedsheet like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I was going to tell him it was over, she choked out. I swear, I didn't know how to say it. I'm done, I shot back coldly. That's all it takes. 3 words. The same 3 words I just said to you. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. Just the cold, hollow ache of betrayal. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't even know where I was going, only that I needed to get out of that house. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of everything that had happened. I ended up at a small park a few miles from home, sitting on a bench under a flickering street lamp. The night was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. My mind raced with memories of Emily, our wedding day, the births of our boys, all the little moments that had defined our life together. And now this. I stayed there for hours, long after the cold had seeped into my bones. When I finally returned home, the house was dark and silent. I climbed into the guest bed, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The next morning, Emily was waiting for me in the kitchen. Her eyes were puffy, and she clutched a mug of coffee like it was a lifeline. We need to talk, she said softly. I've said everything I need to, I replied, brushing past her. No, you haven't, she insisted, stepping into my path. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But we can't leave it like this, Jake. Not for us, not for the boys. Her mention of the boys made me pause. As much as I wanted to shut her out completely, I couldn't ignore the fact that our decisions would affect them too. Fine, I said, sitting at the table. Talk. She sat across from me, her hands trembling as she set down her mug. I made a mistake, she began. A terrible, selfish mistake. And I hate myself for it. But I don't want to lose you, Jake. I don't want to lose our family. You already have, I said bluntly. At least the version of it we used to have. She winced but pressed on. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I'll block his number, quit social media, change jobs, anything to prove to you that I'm serious about fixing this. Her desperation was clear, but it didn't erase the damage that had been done. And what about the boys? I asked. What do we tell them when they start asking questions? When they notice that mom and dad don't even sleep in the same room anymore? Her face crumpled, but she forced herself to respond. We tell them we're working through something, that we love them and will always be here for them, no matter what. And what if I can't forgive you? I asked, my voice low. What then? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine. I'll wait, she said finally, for as long as it takes, because you're the love of my life, Jake. Even if I don't deserve to be yours anymore. Her words hit me harder than I expected, cracking the armor I'd built around my heart. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could somehow rebuild what she had broken. But could I ever truly trust her again? I need time, I said, pulling my hand away. Time to figure out what I want. What's best for me, for the boys. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I'm not giving up on us. The days that followed were a blur of strained interactions and forced smiles. Emily did her best to prove she was serious, deleting her accounts, blocking Jordan, and even drafting a resignation letter. But every gesture felt hollow, like a bandage on a wound too deep to heal. And then, one evening, I found something that changed everything. I was cleaning out the car, trying to keep busy and clear my head, when I found it. A receipt crumpled under the passenger seat. It was from a local cafe, dated just 2 days ago. 2 items were listed, a latte and a smoothie. My heart sank as I stared at it, my mind racing. Emily had told me she was running errands that day. But this, I felt the anger rise again, a storm brewing inside me. I marched back into the house, clutching the receipt like it was a smoking gun. Emily, I called, my voice echoing through the halls. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale as she saw the look on mine. What is this? I demanded, holding up the receipt. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw it, the guilt, the panic. Jake, I can explain. Don't. I cut her off. Just tell me the truth. Were you with him? Emily's face went pale as I held the receipt in front of her. For a moment, she didn't say anything, her lips trembling as she searched for words. Jake, it's not what you think, she finally stammered. Then what is it? I shot back, my voice sharp and unwavering. Because it looks to me like you've been lying to me. Again. Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky breath. I wasn't with him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I searched her face, looking for any sign of the truth. Then who were you with, Emily? I was alone, she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. I went to that cafe because I needed time to think. To think, I repeated, my tone incredulous. You expect me to believe that you just sat there alone with 2 drinks, thinking? Her gaze dropped to the floor, and she wrung her hands nervously. The second drink, it wasn't for him, she said, her voice trembling. It was for Jessica. I asked her to meet me there so I could talk to someone about everything. I needed advice, Jake. I needed someone to tell me how to fix this. Her explanation hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that she was telling the truth. But another part of me, the part that had been burned by her lies before, couldn't let go of the doubt. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice quieter now. Because I knew you wouldn't believe me, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. And I couldn't risk losing you again. I stared at her, my mind racing. If she was lying, it meant she'd learned nothing, that she was still holding on to whatever connection she had with Jordan. But if she was telling the truth, okay, I said finally, my voice firm. If that's the case, I want proof. She looked up at me, confused. Proof? Yes, I said. I want to see your messages with Jessica. I want to know exactly what you talked about. Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she was going to argue. But then she nodded. Okay, she said, pulling out her phone. She handed it to me without hesitation, and I scrolled through her messages. Sure enough, there was a thread with Jessica, dated the same day as the cafe receipt. I need help. I screwed up so badly, Jess. Do you think Jake will ever forgive me? The messages were raw, filled with guilt and desperation. There was no mention of Jordan, no hidden secrets, just a woman who was terrified of losing everything. I handed the phone back to her, my anger ebbing slightly. You're lucky this time, I said, my voice still tinged with frustration. But I need more than promises, Emily. If you want any chance of fixing this, you're going to have to earn it. Every day. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will, she whispered. I swear, Jake. I'll do whatever it takes. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, things began to shift. Emily started seeing a therapist, working through her own guilt and the reasons behind her betrayal. We began couples counseling, having conversations that were raw and painful but necessary. It wasn't easy. Some days, I didn't think I'd ever be able to forgive her. Other days, I caught glimpses of the woman I fell in love with, the woman who was fighting to make things right. As for Jordan, he was gone. Emily blocked his number, cut all ties, and made it clear that there was no place for him in her life. Whether she meant it or not, only time would tell. Even now, I don't know if we'll make it. The scars of her betrayal run deep, and trust doesn't come back overnight. But for the sake of our boys, for the life we've built, I'm willing to try. Because sometimes, love isn't about being perfect. It's about finding a way to keep going, even when everything feels broken. And that's my story. Thanks for reading. I'm not looking for pity or judgment. Just needed to get this off my chest. Would you have given her a second chance? Or would you have walked away? Emily's face went pale as I held the receipt in front of her. For a moment, she didn't say anything, her lips trembling as she searched for words. Jake, it's not what you think, she finally stammered. Then what is it? I shot back, my voice sharp and unwavering. Because it looks to me like you've been lying to me. Again. Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky breath. I wasn't with him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I searched her face, looking for any sign of the truth. Then who were you with, Emily? I was alone, she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. I went to that cafe because I needed time to think. To think, I repeated, my tone incredulous. You expect me to believe that you just sat there alone with 2 drinks, thinking? Her gaze dropped to the floor, and she wrung her hands nervously. The second drink, it wasn't for him, she said, her voice trembling. It was for Jessica. I asked her to meet me there so I could talk to someone about everything. I needed advice, Jake. I needed someone to tell me how to fix this. Her explanation hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that she was telling the truth. But another part of me, the part that had been burned by her lies before, couldn't let go of the doubt. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice quieter now. Because I knew you wouldn't believe me, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. And I couldn't risk losing you again. I stared at her, my mind racing. If she was lying, it meant she'd learned nothing, that she was still holding on to whatever connection she had with Jordan. But if she was telling the truth, okay, I said finally, my voice firm. If that's the case, I want proof. She looked up at me, confused. Proof? Yes, I said. I want to see your messages with Jessica. I want to know exactly what you talked about. Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she was going to argue. But then she nodded. Okay, she said, pulling out her phone. She handed it to me without hesitation, and I scrolled through her messages. Sure enough, there was a thread with Jessica, dated the same day as the cafe receipt. I need help. I screwed up so badly, Jess. Do you think Jake will ever forgive me? The messages were raw, filled with guilt and desperation. There was no mention of Jordan, No hidden secrets. Just a woman who was terrified of losing everything. I handed the phone back to her, my anger ebbing slightly. "You're lucky this time," I said, my voice still tinged with frustration. "But I need more than promises, Emily. If you want any chance of fixing this, you're gonna have to earn it. Every day." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will," she whispered. "I swear, Jake. I'll do whatever it takes." Weeks turned into months, and slowly, things began to shift. Emily started seeing a therapist, working through her own guilt and the reasons behind her betrayal. We began couples counseling, having conversations that were raw and painful but necessary. It wasn't easy. Some days, I didn't think I'd ever be able to forgive her. Other days, I caught glimpses of the woman I fell in love with, the woman who was fighting to make things right. As for Jordan, he was gone. Emily blocked his number, cut all ties, and made it clear that there was no place for him in her life. Whether she meant it or not, only time would tell. Even now, I don't know if we'll make it. The scars of her betrayal run deep, and trust doesn't come back overnight. But for the sake of our boys, for the life we've built, I'm willing to try. Because sometimes, love isn't about being perfect. It's about finding a way to keep going, even when everything feels broken. And that's my story. Thanks for reading. I'm not looking for pity or judgment. Just needed to get this off my chest. Would you have given her a second chance? Or would you have walked away?